to the new. The new is not necessarily questioned as such, but there is a widespread convention of the, quoting from Groys himself, impossibility of the new in art. Unquote, and another quote after that. The initial postmodern sorrow about the end of history is gone, writes Boris Groys. Now we seem to be happy about the loss of history, of the idea of progress, of the utopian future, all things traditionally connected with the phenomena of the new. Liberation from the obligation to be historically new seemed to be a great victory of life is important here, over formerly predominant historical narrative, which tends to subjugate, ideologize, and formalize reality, unquote. The notion of the new, or the rejection of the new that Groys describes and later challenges, is not the idea of the new as such, but rather the new as conceived through the narrative or meta-narratives of modernity. What stands in opposition to the new, according to the discourse that celebrates the death of the new, is not the old, but the very notion of life. At least that's the way that Groys understands it. Instead of the modern abstract construction of the opposition of old and new, art finally has the chance to approach life with no meditation. Quote, artists and theorists want to be politically and culturally engaged in social reality, is describing now the contemporary arts. They want to reflect on their own cultural identity, express their individual desire, and so on, unquote. Groys does not challenge this view on its own ground. He does not adhere to the modern construction of art history. He himself wants to bring art to life. The only question is, under what condition does art appear to be most alive? At the center of his essay, Groys examined the role of the museum as preventing or enabling the entry of art into life. The postmodern rejection of the museum is peculiar. While the modernist rejection of the museum, bracket, which Groys unwittingly refers to, was a rejection of the old in the name of the new, the so-called postmodernist or contemporary dismissal of the museum is an endeavor of destroying the very opposition of old and new in the name of social, political, and personal realities. So the traditional role of the museum was actually to represent the reality of art, to show a certain progress, how we are moving from ancient art to classical art to modern art and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's not one narrative, but many, but that was the idea of the museum. Groys obviously does not accept this view, but he has a very particular view of how the museum can function still in, let's call it a postmodern environment. So he has a strange combination of a very progressive or postmodern approach and at the same time very modernist and supporting a pro-museum approach. I will continue. The relation between the museum and the world, according to Groys, is markedly different. It is the tension between the collection and its great other, it's a quotation from Groys, that is reality. Whenever he used the word real, he obviously does not mean to something real, but yeah, let's say it. The museum is not secondary to real history, nor it is merely a reflection and documentation of what really happened outside its walls, according to autonomous laws of historical development. The contrary is true. Reality itself is secondary in relation to the museum. The real can be defined only in comparison with the museum collection. So the museum, the reality is only what is left out of the museum. The inversion of the relation between the museum and the real enable a different perception of the museum's apparatus. The museum collection does not represent, according to Groys, the culmination of a certain culture or the artworks to be seen as eternally important or the historical development. The arts that should emerge from reality should be different from the art that exists within the museum walls. So the art within the museum for contemporary artists is obviously dead. And the reason why it's so important to keep the collection of the museum is not to see what you should do or how to progress, but quite exactly the opposite, to see what not to do. So the only way, the only possibility of understanding what is new is through the construction of what is old. This is the brilliant move of Groys, but problematic as well. Accordingly, the museum does not represent reality, but construct reality as the residuum of the museum. Groys accepts the modern and postmodern views that sees the museum as a graveyard of artworks. But the museum's enclosure, the enclosure of the collection, is the only way of unfolding what is really new and alive. In Groys' terminology, the new and the alive become synonymous. While evaluating Groys' theory on its own ground, his argument is highly appealing. He is able to connect the most conservative institute of the museum with the progressive gesture of the new. In order to disenclose, borrowing from Anzi, there is a necessity of an enclosure. Only the old, according to this logic, can promise the emergence of the new. But this disenclosure is possible only on the basis of the binary opposition between the institutional and reality. This dichotomous thinking is what enables the construction of the new. The polar opposition that Groys proposes is surely not hierarchical. The museum does not reveal a certain truth about reality. The reality is not the primary source that the museum endeavors to portray. The museum is structured, and as such, it does not have an authority over reality, nor does reality exercise its power over the museum, as reality is conceived, according to Groys, as the other of the museum. The museum is attracted towards other and constantly collects possible artifacts and objects which are yet to be displayed in the museum. But this neo-conservative progressive view of collecting and art history does not solve the contemporary criticism of the new. The modernist and contemporary critiques of the museum are dramatically different. The modernists rejected the museum, now I'm generalizing obviously, but still. The modernists rejected the museum in the name of the new. The new that can manifest itself, as Groys rightly argues, only through the apparatus of the museum. The contemporary critique of the museum does not question the museum in the name of the new, but in fact tries, successfully or not, to establish a discourse which is free from the boundaries of the new and the old. The new that contemporary art is seeking is not the new which is different from the old, be it classical art or modern art. In order to liberate itself from the new, contemporary art does not offer a new concept as opposed to the modernist new. This kind of gesture which rejects the new of the modernist new, this kind of gesture will obviously fall into the same trap of the new. Instead of offering a different notion of new, contemporary art, this is my perspective, is simply indifferent to the new. It draws its inspiration eclectically from different sources: politics, literature, philosophy, modern and traditional art. Contemporary art is not free from the new, nor does it try to liberate itself from its grip. It is concerned with a much more crucial issue and a deeper problem, the question of meaning. From this perspective, Groys's theory should be read as the parody of the relation between modern artists and the new, the avant-garde and the museum, the modernist attraction to aesthetics and appearance, and the 20th century obsession with the new reaches its culmination with Groys's concept of the new, an empty play of special relation, movement and differences, in and out and in the museum. The modernist new has nothing new about it if its possibility is only of appearing as new is to be different from the artworks in the museum collection. Paradoxically, in order to really be new, art has to abandon its obsession with the new. Art has to find a new purpose and meaning, which is simply to be meaningful, not alive, as Groys claimed. I think that in this way it will be very useful to the dead ends that the contemporary or modern art reach to with regard to the new is solved very easily if you look at literature and poetry, where obviously modernism were dealing with finding new ways of expression, but still it was not only about it. So there is, as I mentioned in the first part, there is no way of coming out from the new. The question if the new is standing alone, the new is becoming an empty shell, an empty aesthetic shell, which you have nothing to fill it with. On the other hand, if you look at literature and poetry, which is written in, the relation with meaning is always, it has an inherent relation, which makes it alive or meaningful again and again, and not dealing like modern art only with aesthetics. The museum is not detached from the so-called reality. It is a part of it. Much of the contemporary artworks are created in relation to the work which are to the works in the museum. The artwork in the museum are not dead. Far from that. They are so alive that some artists feel the need to kill them in order to pass on to a new phase in art. A death of an artwork might happen only when the artwork lost its meaning. When the discourse around it, or the world in which it was created, or the world it unfolded, to use Heidegger's terminology, has vanished. Or simply put, when the work is trapped within its empty aesthetic shell. Groys's essay is largely theoretical, but he addresses a few artwork in order to verify his thesis of difference without difference, which is possible, according to him, only in the museum. Difference without difference is something that he is borrowing from Kierkegaard. Fancy expression as it is, difference without difference, is simply an artwork that resembles another artwork or an existing object, ready-made, and hence it is similar, not different, in appearance, but different since it is shown as an artwork or as a new artwork. The examples that Groys presents are the ready-made of Duchamp, obviously, the work of artists that I don't know so well, Mike Bitlow, Shirley Levin, who created copies of famous artwork such as the work of Picasso, and the object of Fischli and Weiss that resemble ready-made, but in fact are sculptures made of a certain kind of plastic. The concept of difference without difference is taken from Kierkegaard's notions of Jesus. The only way for God to manifest itself as really new is to appear like human. Difference is something that can be conceived according to difference is something which can be conceived according to Kierkegaard. In order to be new and not a mere difference, the God has to be different, but without appearing as different. Quote from Groys. His main point is, Kierkegaard, being that a certain difference is recognized as such only because we already have the capability to recognize and identify this difference as difference. So no difference can ever be new, because if it were really new, it could not be recognized as difference. To recognize means always to remember. But to recognize, remember difference is obviously not a new difference. The same logic is applied by Groys to the ready-made of Duchamp and to the replicas of Pinto, Levine, Fischli, and Weiss. He famously or infamously writes, quote, Duchamp's fountain is a kind of Christ among things, and the art of the ready-made a kind of Christianity of the art world. This leads Groys to a rather strange conclusion, quote, today, to be really new, an artwork cannot even repeat the old differences between art object and ordinary things. By means of repeating these differences, it is possible only to create a different artwork, not a new artwork. The new artwork looks really new and alive only if it resembles, in a certain sense, every other ordinary profane thing or every other ordinary product of popular culture, unquote. In short, the only possible artwork nowadays, new artworks that's to say, must belong either to the ready-made tradition or to the pop art tradition, which is a strange conclusion according to me. Let us not ponder on this conclusion, but go further and explore Groys' suggestion.